Thank you for tuning in to Planet Radio with your host, Miss Deja Vu. Look for news updates and stories. We have a special event coming this summer. You'll want to stay tuned for news updates and other additional links in the description box below here at the Field Report. Grab a cup of coffee and join us here for this news update. I want to get to the top story coming from Rebel Media, and this report also followed up with Mike Cernovich from his new media post and Joe Posobiec. Laura Loomer was arrested for interrupting the Trump play depicting the assassination of President Trump. We'll follow up more and put any additional links below in the description box. Let's get to the other news story. Jeff Bezos' purchase of Whole Foods. Another story we'd like to follow up on, just doing some updates, and I think this is an interesting story as well. I didn't get the whole story, but I'm going to follow up on it shortly after this. Also, to the other story, the attack in London, where there was a man who drove a van into a bunch of people who were attending a mosque in London. And we're going to do what I hope will be much easier to report open mic and freestyle, which means raw reporting more or less. And I want to tell you guys that what I've noticed in the last, I don't know, maybe week or so, maybe the light bulb finally went off with me. I don't know. But I noticed just the trend and where the news has been headed for 10 years. And if you followed any of my stories or posts, I started out as an amateur. I got into radio, and I had to really work really hard at learning how to do this job. Now, cross-training, I didn't think I was going to really do any, quote, reporting, so to speak, but I noticed where the trend is heading. So we might do updates, and we're going to discuss maybe some topics, I think, blog about it, but there's a lot of conservative news bloggers I've been following. So I'm not going to be doing the detailed reports, more or less. I'm just going to do updates, but I found this story. Incredible moment where aid worker sprints 150 yards through gunfire. I love this story. This is why we started the Field Report, for a story like that. It's too bad. I mean, like I said, I would love to do more news reporting, but this story is just fascinating. It's the whole reason I got in uniform. It's the whole reason we follow stories about rescuing children. In this case, this rescue occurred in Iraq, I believe. From that report, I'll follow up on this, but we're going to follow up on the story. I already did an independent post, but the whole reason we like to warm up and tell you a feel-good story is for that reason. And the whole story about Vets for Child Rescue, to me, is the whole reason we do this. I mean, I've been burned out. Anything else? I didn't like where the story, quote, Pizzagate was going, or DC Pedogate, because it's undermining the real story. And mainstream media maybe has a way of doing that. And that was the whole reason, to me. You just got to stick to your core values. You tell a story, you tell a story. Okay? And this is a human story when we think in the respect of children and rescue. And anyone that could cross over to another report or try to dismiss it, to me, they're not doing their homework, and that's obvious. And that's kind of what I think a lot of reporters are saying out there, that if a journalist is going to dismiss this as just hoax or a story or that, they're not doing their homework. They're reading off of a teleprompter, and that's really what is going on. I personally can't go in and tell somebody how to do their job. They work for a different, publishing company or a business, or they write for themselves, or they have a column. They work for the AP, Reuters, etc. I mean, personally, I can't go in and tell them how to do their job, because they know what they have to do in order to keep that job. And that's the whole thing. What makes independent reporting means we got to stick to the core values. So we can't just go put out stories like this. As much as the mainstream media likes to make the assumption that reporters, we have principles. And the whole thing is, mainstream news, they read off of a teleprompter. So I had this back and forth with a family member who told me he was disappointed in me. Well, I don't read off of a teleprompter. Doing raw reporting means you actually have to read the reports and do the homework. And you have to find a way to report it to the audience. And my personal opinion, doesn't matter as much as the story itself. Now, I have to think in terms of, is this a story I'm familiar with? Am I comfortable with it? And I have to evaluate it before I ever post it. I'm not going to start throwing stuff out there. But again, doing open mic and freestyle, I still have to proofread it. I can't just post this stuff out there. That, to me, is irresponsible. And I want to talk about responsible reporting. We learned over the last week about responsible reporting. This whole thing that went down between Alex Jones and Megyn Kelly, it was more than that. And thank you, Alex Jones, for correcting the record, because then that puts all of us in a controversial position. I want to be able to freely watch somebody, whether I agree with them or disagree. I can watch all types of news story. I am not selective to just one reporter. I want to go on Alex Jones when I feel like it. I want to go to this person when I feel like it. I want to listen to all the new independent. I follow a lot of topics. So it's somehow in some way, they want us to feel restricted to that free commerce of information. And I feel really, I'm uncomfortable with it. On principle, it's wrong. I could like any of these reporters, but on principle, they're wrong. And that's what makes us independent. Because if you're sticking to your core principles, you're not going to be throwing stories out like that. And what happened in North Korea, and we're going to touch on this story about Otto Warmbier, okay, who died today, it's no different. When you start controlling the way people get to watch and read news to what is happening in North Korea, to me, it would be no different. We want to keep our free speech and the ability to access information. It's like hands off. Those are our freedoms. Okay, and what you have is corporate media controlling what you hear and see. And this is coming right from the horse's mouth, Mika Brzezinski. They can't control it, and they're bothered by that. Anytime somebody has to control what you see and hear, it's one thing, it's your children. It's another with adults. You have to think for yourself and do for yourself as an adult. And you also have the ability to read a book. If you don't, and if you choose not to, you won't. Now, not all people are following what's trending in the news, but to me, you're 10 steps ahead of it when you know how news is reported, okay? So therefore, that's why I can't go down that road with somebody who makes these kind of irresponsible comments. Because to me, if I went in and told like my sister or brother to how to do their job, I'm totally out of line. I've done this almost 30 years. Okay, I started out as a radio host, in 2015, but I have done other things, okay? I didn't want to take on this job because it's a lot of responsibility. You just can't throw stuff out there. And I have a lot of respect for people who vet their information. I didn't know this. I had to learn. I started out in the whole new media doing the background stuff, but I had to learn how to do reporting. I didn't want to, personally. I would much prefer to stay in the background, but this really became a challenge for me. And we started out doing the field report. And I had to make some big changes with this. But this is the changes I'm comfortable with at this point. I can't go in and tell somebody how to do their job, though. Okay? But it's one thing I've learned the hard way. I've gone out and done the raw reporting. I have done photography assignments. I have done these things. I have had interviews. Some of them were epic fails. But as far as I'm concerned, that's how you learn. But once I start getting the hang of it, and once I started learning how to do this job, I realized it was about core principles. And principles matter, especially in this job. Okay? And I'll maybe at some point I'll talk about it. But let me stick to the point here, why I'm doing this blog. When people go in and start telling people how to perceive news, listen, perception is reality. If that's the way they perceive it, they're only looking at certain news stories. They're not getting a broad view. They're narrow-minded, and I can't change their mind. This is not about persuading them whether they agree with me or not. They have to do their homework. And we put the links below because we figured you can do your homework. I'm not holding these people's hands. If they want to do the assignments and they want to do the homework and they want to report on this, be my guest. As far as trying to make everybody happy, it's not going to happen. That's why you got to stick to your core principles. Do I think that sometimes reports get overlooked? Do they go underreported? Obviously. But for some of us, we can only do a couple reports at a time. I appreciate that there are people that have a team of studio reporters, but for somebody like me, a 1-girl, 2-girl operation, we only have so much time. We're limited. I don't have all this money to go spending on an expensive studio. I don't have some big paycheck coming in. This is just raw reporting. And we, as the little guy here, need an opportunity to move forward. Otherwise, what we hear is, well, you're stuck on food stamps and you're settling for less. That is not the case. I want to be able to get out there, do a report, and be respected without being threatened or being intimidated by somebody who doesn't respect us. The whole point is, if they don't respect us, we're not going on that assignment. That's a game changer for somebody who's making an editorial decision. This is what newspaper business used to be. You could go out and do a report and you got credit for doing that because you did it and you did your homework. And that's what real news reporting is. This is what the old anchors and anchor women did. It was raw. It was natural. It wasn't all this manufactured stuff with green screens and all this technology. Sometimes it's just going up, getting out there and getting the story. As far as I'm concerned, all this other fluff that a lot of people want to put out there and they want to do these fancy studios, hey, if they have the budget, do it. That's what I look at it. I'm not bothered by that at all. We just don't have that budget. We don't have that kind of money to throw at them. So when I hear somebody making the comparison that somehow I'm going to be like the Megyn Kellys of the world, I'm just not there. Okay, doesn't mean I can't achieve those things, but I'm going to do it on principle. When it comes to making a news story, and to me, what Megyn Kelly did is that she made a decisive decision. She was going to go with one report without reporting on the report regarding the kids in the trafficking story. So she's going to say that Sandy Hook was bad, but this other story, pretend that doesn't exist. So you can't have it both ways. On principle, she was wrong. She wouldn't take the story on the abduction of children, but she'll take the story on Sandy Hook. That's why, on principle, she's completely wrong. She sat there and demonized Alex Jones, who's trying to report something totally different from what she's comfortable. It's easy to sit there and comfortable, insulated, making millions of dollars, and then this moral self-righteousness, like somehow I'm more morally upright than the next person. And the way she went after Alex Jones, she was completely on principle wrong. And she showed, and then people like this show that they're arrogant and they're egomaniacs. And at the end of the day, that might work for the moment, but in the long run, people look to reporters who are trustworthy. And I'm going to tell you, when you build trust with your audience, whether I like you guys or not, I want to be trustworthy. Okay, whether you like me or not, I want to be trustworthy. You won't get a different side of me. I'm going to do my best to report it and be as authentic and accurate as I can. Now, to that person that's arrogant and is looking at it from a perspective of status, and that's what they want. Well, then there's plenty of news bloggers to pick from. I mean, that's the nice thing, is that it's not North Korea. You can turn on NBC if you want. You can turn on ABC. You can turn on CBS. You can listen to Independent. You can listen to NPR. I listen to all these channels. I like NPR. I actually like public radio. I prefer it. That's just the whole premise to what we're trying to do. I love that the public pays and supports us and our projects. I don't want it any other way. When it starts to get into these big contracts and a lot of millions of dollars, I mean, you lose sight of it. Authentic reporters out there are working their tail end off. And when somebody lies, it cheats everyone. And on principle, I see the hard work. I see what we go through when we proofread and we read it and we practice every day at this. So this is not exactly an easy job, but I don't go around telling people how to do their job. So I personally think it's a conflict of interest when people start throwing around these opinions. If they want to go take a chair and do the reporting themselves, by all means, go for it, because these average people out here that are particular or they're complaining, this is not consumer media. You can go to, there's no way to make an audience happy. 100,000, 200, 3 million people. I got to go based on core principles. The only way I would ever make the 2 million, 3 million rank is because people like the way we report it, and we're reporting honestly and we're on principle. Otherwise, what you're going to have is it's okay to report on Sandy Hook but not the child trafficking story, which that on principle is completely wrong. And that's why I'm happy to say that Alex Jones corrected the record, because to me personally, and that's why I really see the significance of both of them being accountable for how they approached a story. On one end, you have to make your subscribers happy, I guess. I don't know. I only have a small group of people that follow my posts, and I'm happy with that. Do I want to get bigger? Yeah, but I have to over time. And on principle, I'm not going to throw away an opportunity where I can engage the audience on something that important when it comes to Veterans for Child Rescue. To me, it's too important. You can't get this wrong. Thank you for listening.